Hello, my name is Kayla Reilly, and I hope that today you will learn something new about anxiety through my capstone research project. So let's get started. Had you ever been lost as a child? I want you to imagine you're 10 years old and at the fair with your family. Tons of people, loud carnival music, bright colors and rides. Your 10-year-old self would describe it as the best day ever. Until, lost in the festivities, you realize that you're no longer by your parents' side. In fact, they're nowhere to be seen at all. Your heart starts to pound. Your mind races. Am I an orphan? Will I ever see my family again? Muscles tense, and you can't keep your breath. Everything becomes a blur as you search for your family. Starting to panic, you catch a glimpse of a familiar figure. You run to their side, and you feel safe and relieved. I want you to imagine all of those same feelings again, but this time there's no escape or relief. Those feelings are stuck with you and you can't get away from them. Everyone experiences anxiety to some extent, but it becomes an anxiety disorder when you feel in danger when you're safe, and it interferes with your ability to function on a daily basis. 7 in 100, or 4.4 million children in the US are diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. Of those 4.4 million, only 15 to 25% receive help for their anxiety. 1 in 3, or 23 million children, meet the requirement to be diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, but do not receive any help at all. So what will happen to these kids if their anxiety isn't addressed? Well, untreated anxiety leads to compounding issues, and it's known in the medical community as the gateway to other mental health issues. And these issues only grow as the child ages and can impact their adult lives. And this is why I chose to do this project. My goal is to research anxiety to develop tools to help children change behavioral patterns by casting a vision of physical products within a system to provide a roadmap to overcome anxiety. Before we get started, I'm going to outline what we're going to be covering today. We just reviewed why this topic is important. Then we will cover the need for innovation within the current solutions. We will understand how anxiety works within the brain. We will look at my proposed solution. Then we will review and conclude. Current solutions to treat anxiety are therapy, medication to treat symptoms, and coping mechanisms. There are benefits to each of these, but what I am solving for my users is access for the underserved. Even so, there's so much opportunity for innovation within each of these current solutions. Dr. Nicole is an esteemed child psychiatrist, and she says that there is not adequate help for these children. Schools in many underserved communities have no mental health support, and some schools have one counselor spread across an entire district. I'm not trying to replace the need for therapy or medication. My goal is to provide access to those who can't afford it or do not have access for their anxiety. Which leads me to the opportunity for innovation. I'll be creating a representation of products, physical and tangible, to enhance learning and retention, and combining it with leading approaches used to treat anxiety, which are CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, and exposure therapy. And all this sits within a system that can be followed and adapted to meet the specific needs of the user. But first, let's learn a little bit more about how anxiety works within the brain. It's a very popular hypothesis that anxiety is caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain. A chemical imbalance occurs when a person has too much or too little of certain neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are critical in transporting information in the brain. They're basically the body's chemical messengers. And according to studies done at the Harvard Medical School, there are millions of reactions between these neurotransmitters every day, which makes it just about impossible to determine a chemical imbalance. But the problem with this theory of a chemical imbalance is that while this theory holds some truth, we risk oversimplifying anxiety and mental illness. This chemical imbalance is not the sole perpetrator and has yet to be proven the initial cause of anxiety. But the good news is that there is evidence that improvements to this imbalance of the neurotransmitters can be made through neuroplasticity. Simply put, neuro means brains and plastic means changeable. How it works is that these neural pathways are how we connect relatively distant areas of our brains, very much like the roads we drive on. Each pathway is associated with a particular action or behavior. Neuroplasticity is when new thoughts and skills carve new pathways in our brain. Repetition and practice strengthen these neural pathways, and this is what forms new long-term habits because our brain easily travels these well-established paths. Old pathways not used weaken and eventually disappear. So the exciting and good news is that with repeated and directed attention towards change, it gives us the ability to literally rewire our brains. We need one last understanding before we can move on to the solution, and that's how the limbic system causes our fight-flight response. Our limbic brain manages our emotions, but regulates our anxiety and fears as well. If we don't learn to manage it, it can lead us to being reactive and impulsive. The function of the amygdala is to learn what is safe and what to be afraid of. These signals are then sent to the hypothalamus, which creates adrenaline and cortisol. This is what leads us to our fight-flight response, which we all have experienced. Fight-flight is very useful if, let's say, you're hiking and you almost step on a rattlesnake. In this case, it's very good because it just saved your life, but only if used in short bursts. The problem comes when that fight-flight response is always turned on, and it can have lasting effects on your body. This is where most of the symptoms of anxiety come from. These are warning signals that your body is trying to tell you that something is very, very wrong. Some of those issues include tightened muscles, tunnel vision, shortness of breath, heart racing, which leads to increased blood flow, leaving you with clammy hands and cold feet. This also turns off your digestive system and your immune system, which is why you get sick more often when you're stressed. This might seem dramatic, but it's also found to be related to an earlier death. I could go on, but I hope that you see how serious this really is. To add to this, 95% of our decisions are made in our subconscious mind. So we're not sitting there choosing to be anxious most of the time. If anxiety is suppressed, it often comes out in other ways. And the sad truth is that most kids have difficulty verbalizing and expressing their emotions, which results in anxiety showing through behavior such as anger, shouting, big movements, clenching, blaming, defensiveness, attacking others verbally and physically, or they might shrink back in procrastination, distractions, numbness, hiding, or complying with things they don't agree with. Many of these kids aren't trying to be bad. Remember how 95% of our decisions are made in our subconscious mind? 1 in 3 of these problem children are really just struggling and don't know how to properly handle their anxiety. Imagine how giving them help, the help they need, could change the entire dynamics of a classroom and a home. Not only that, but think of the difference that would make in their life. Now that we understand anxiety in the brain, I want to introduce you to Ollie. Ollie is afraid of the wind, thunder, and other bad weather. When he feels trapped, he often acts out and is disrespectful, which gets him sent to the principal's office frequently. When he feels trapped and overwhelmed, he acts out and is treated as a problem child, when in reality, he doesn't know how to deal with his big emotions. He is also shy and doesn't like attention to be on him, which makes him embarrassed and act out when he acts out. Ollie is scared of the weather. And if he's sitting at home and it starts to rain, his brain, specifically his amygdala, interprets the situation as dangerous. When he hears that ping on the roof, his response is to hide and avoid that situation and that rain at all costs. His body then finds relief because this fear is no longer in front of him or a threat. His brain thinks, I could have died. I better avoid that situation again to survive. And at this point, this is where the anxiety increases, because the brain increases that anxiety response and strengthens that neural pathway. This is where I believe we have the opportunity to break the anxiety cycle with my proposed solution, MAP. MAP stands for My Anxiety Plan. So instead of avoiding that anxious feeling, we're going to give children tools to help them remember how to respond to that anxiety and face that fear. There's very much evidence that this is an effective way to treat anxiety, according to studies done on exposure therapy. Before we get into some of the proposed solutions, let me take you behind the scenes of my process and highlight some of the work I've done. I spent the majority of my project understanding the issue of anxiety in children, because this is what fed every single design choice made going forward. I believe that if you do not understand the problem or the people it's affecting, you will never create anything that will actually help, and you've lost the heart of what design actually is. So with all this information, I created my war wall, conducted interviews, and prototyped most of my concepts. Since this is a research project, after understanding the problem, I then visualized the important information that will help you understand how it works. I ideated my system and the products within the system, and the remainder of the time I spent making everything you will see today. With MAP, there are 3 avenues in which a child can be helped: the parent, the teacher, and the counselor. Since I'm focusing on the underserved, my users would benefit most through the parent and the teacher, but parts of the solution can be adapted for the use of therapy. Since I'm limited on time, I will only go through the parent-child relationship within the system. This is Melissa. Melissa is a single mom who has limited time and resources. She has noticed symptoms of anxiety in Ollie, but because of the financial burden of counseling, it is not a viable option for them. As an alternative, she's used MAP to help Ollie overcome his anxiety. Some of the ways that MAP benefits Melissa is its educational resources, so she can learn how to best help Ollie. Through the website, she can find training on how to identify some of Ollie's triggers and the symptoms he's experiencing. Then she will learn how to walk him through overcoming his anxiety. She also really values being able to reach out in the community to other parents going through some of the same struggles as she is. There's also support available from therapists through the system that she can reach out to for advice. She will be able to track Ollie's progress and see improvements and growth as he uses the tools available to him. In the game, which we will touch on later, comes a teaching tool to help prepare Ollie for the future and how to respond to anxiety before he is in it. The journal comes with a guide to help Melissa with prompting questions to support Ollie as he learns about anxiety and himself. And all of these resources will give parents like Melissa convenient access to help guide and support their children with anxiety. The reason behind creating these products is because of research proving that this is the best way to increase learning and retention. And this is the use of physical objects or activity to enhance the cognitive process and simplify mental routines, which decreases the cognitive load. This is even more impactful when applying it to anxiety, because when our brain goes into survival mode, which is where most of our symptoms of anxiety come from, in this response, our decision-making parts of the brain actually turn off, and making these physical products help people like Ollie respond to their anxiety, even though it might not be intuitive in the moment. It is important to my solution that my process or products stay very simple. Since I'm designing for underserved kids, making these products affordable is also very important. So I kept all of the technology out of the system. In the fight-flight response, our muscles tighten up for action. But if Ollie is afraid of the wind and it's not going to hurt him, his body is then reacting to a false alarm. One of the tools the CBT offers to combat this is something called the tense and relax. This is basically where you tense all the muscles in your body for 5 seconds and then release all of your muscles. And this releases all of that adrenaline built up in your body. How it works is there's a sturdy ring placed within the silicone, and when you twist it, it winds up slightly. This acts as a physical reminder to tense all of those muscles. So when Ollie is nervous about the wind, he sees the tool and can find relief by responding and addressing to this false alarm in his body, instead of avoiding that situation and letting that anxiety cycle increase that fear response. This is a very simple product, but has depth to the science behind it. It uses a technology and a technique that is basically helping your brain soothe anxious feelings. We have a special nerve ending called the Pacinian corpuscle in places like the palms of our hands, our face, and our arms. When you put pressure on these nerves, it generates these delta waves in the brain and can have a positive and calming effect on regions of your brain, such as the amygdala, where most of our anxiety lives. You may have used these calming methods before, knowingly or not. When I'm stressed, sometimes I rub my face with my hands, or some people rub their arms when they're stressed. Another option is to rub your hands together as if you're washing them. This tool helps Ollie discreetly calm himself down at school when it's raining. This bracelet acts as a safety net with a physical product to help him find relief from his anxiety without avoiding the situation. Let's talk about posture for just a sec. There are so many studies connecting how you hold yourself with your confidence. Curling or slouching is a protective and defensive posture, and our subconscious does this to protect our organs from a perceived threat. If our body is getting signals that we're unsafe, we have troubles focusing, making decisions, and it shuts down our cortex, or thinking and reasoning parts of our brain. So when we're fearing a situation and holding ourselves in that closed body posture, the task literally becomes harder. So when Ollie is having this fear and he's starting to curl, he sees his bright colored band and remembers to open his body posture. The slit in the bracelet encourages him to connect his hands behind his back, opening his posture and rolling his shoulders back, and holding himself with confidence. This tool is a physical representation of the 4-7-8 breathing method. This ratio for breathing calms your sympathetic nervous system and activates your fight-flight response and switches it to your parasympathetic nervous system, which is also called and known as the rest and digest state. As Ollie breathes in for 4 counts, he's pulling the product apart to represent his lungs filling with air. Then he will hold his breath for 7 seconds. Each time he moves it, there's a haptic feedback of a click, so he doesn't have to keep track. And finally, he exhales all of that air in his lungs for 8 seconds. Sometimes Ollie repeats this up to 4 times. This is a helpful thinking tool and my personal favorite. And in my personal opinion, the most impactful item within the system. Its goal is to help Ollie rework his thoughts and speak truth into his anxiety. With anxiety disorders, situations are interpreted as bigger and more dangerous than they actually are. Once he's identified an anxious thought, he challenges those spirals and sees situations with perspective and truth. If we remember from earlier, when we repeat thoughts, good or bad, this creates neural pathways in our brains. This tool helps him reduce the lies and replace them with truth. Each color has a partnering question. For example, this one is, have I confused a thought with a fact? And what advice would you give to someone with this thought? As you can see, it twists and changes colors. The first question that Ollie reads here is, what's the worst that could happen? And that partnering question that dives deeper into this is, if this did happen, how would I handle it? As you can see, each color addresses a spiral that anxiety often takes, such as generalizing, black and white thinking, catastrophic thinking, overestimating danger, and filtering, which is only seeing the good or bad of a situation. Because of time, I can't go into the rules of this game, but I created it to meet the Ohio's K-12 social and emotional learning standards. How it works is there's 4 different cards. The exclamation mark represents a fear or anxiety. The wrench is a tool to combat that fear. The location icon represents a situation where that fear is played out. And the light bulb is an understanding card, which gives you certain powers over the fear. As you travel throughout the game, you are learning how to think through overcoming anxiety without having to be in it yourself. And once you get to the end, you can count your points and see who wins. This is also a really great way to build empathy of kids who don't suffer with anxiety, but have friends that do. I hope that today you've seen the possibility to overcome anxiety. Not only that, but the overwhelming amount of opportunity to take the system infinitely further. There's so many combinations of solutions to make these anxiety tools into products. I just visualized a few. Before I conclude, I want to review the goals of the project by looking at the brief. I researched anxiety and developed tools to help children change behavioral patterns by casting a vision of physical products within a system to provide a roadmap to overcome anxiety. How was my brief fulfilled? Well, I researched current methods. I researched the imbalances in the brain, neuroplasticity, the limbic system, the anxiety cycle, and much, much more. For products, I made sure that they were very simple, affordable, and they included no technology. For my system, it was adaptable, and it was made for the child, but can be supported through the parent, the teacher, or the counselor. And it's accessible to anyone who might need it. I hope that this presentation taught you how you might be able to overcome anxiety and better understand how to help others suffering with it, because these tools can apply to everyone, not just children. So who would you help? Thank you.